aging, sickness, and death. So the implication in my mind there was that the Buddha was looking for cessation of that suffering, of aging, sickness, and death. And my mind immediately went to thinking about how to escape aging, sickness, and death. That seemed impossible until I started thinking about it like I am not in the future and I am not in the past. I only think of myself in this linear fashion of how of existing in the future and existing in the past. And if I no longer exist in the past, then I'm not aging because there's no past.
You've achieved the deathless state.
So, and if I'm not thinking about future, then I'm not suffering about death because I'm only right here. And then it was like all of the things that the Buddha says happened. I felt like I felt it, you know, the help me out here, John. What arose? All the things that were knowledge arose, and insight arose, and
illuminating insight arose.
Right, and I just wanted to like get up and walk around and absorb that and dance around, and I've been thinking about it since, and trying to figure out how to explain it. And the only thing that I've come up with to say is that, and it goes back to what Matt was saying even earlier in Qigong, at any moment in time, there is an infinite number of phenomena that are arising and passing away and could potentially be experienced by this all the time. I could always be experiencing an infinite number of phenomena. I could take it in, I could remember it, I could make perceptions about the future about it, but at any point in time, there's all this phenomena that could be perceived. So when I'm only thinking about the few that I captured in the past, or the few that I might capture in the future, all the potential for experience just goes like this, becomes this little tiny, narrow little tube of perception. And I ignore all the other potential phenomena. And that, thinking about how I perceive myself on a timeline, how we have that linear way of thinking makes sense because it helps us to navigate our world. It's impossible to capture every phenomena and use it to make it through life or to experience life.
And like it and dislike it.
Right. But it's really all irrelevant. What we've actually captured is mostly irrelevant stuff. And yet, that's all we're thinking about. And yeah.
Ego tunnel.
Right. And a tunnel. It's like an ego tunnel. And then so then this morning, the one other little thing that happened, not little thing, but I mean, it's been since last night, I've just been able to like, you know, I'm definitely like, don't want to lose that. So I'm definitely like trying to come up with little ways to kind of remember it. But this morning when I was having breakfast, a clinging craving comes up for me, especially recently. My noticing of it has been around food. So when I was eating breakfast, I had my breakfast, and then I wanted another piece of bread with peanut butter. And that thought came into my head, and I thought, okay, well, that's on a timeline. You put yourself into the future You put yourself into the experience of having a piece of bread with peanut butter. So let's just look at that for a second. Because if it's on a timeline, you've shortchanged yourself about all the other potential phenomena you could be experiencing. So, do you need food, or are you just focusing on a timeline of your potential future? And it just helped me to see, oh, that's okay, that's on a tile. I've made a decision about my future. I need to go have a piece of bread with peanut butter. And it was like, oh, okay, no, I don't. I can just like wait 3 minutes and I don't want it anymore. So
you put down the peanut butter.
I didn't know they
didn't
had
do
peanut
it.
butter.
Peanut butter, dude. It's not chocolate cake for me. I'm sorry.
Jen, I think you'd all agree you explained that wonderfully well. Thank you.
Did you have that on recording?
Yes. Yes. The whole world now knows. And we had a little conversation this morning.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
So this is a perfect example of how one thought, a single thought, could be either self-referential or be lacking in I-making. And that thought was, I want to be the world's most wonderful teacher. What's the intention behind it? If the intention is so the world knows that I'm the world's most wonderful teacher, you're in trouble. But if your intention is simply an acknowledgement of what is occurring, that you are the world's most wonderful teacher, at least in that moment, there's no I-making in it. A single thought, what's the intention behind it? What's the right intention behind it? It's the subtlety of the Dhamma that we're able to thrash out here within this proper context. So thank you for sharing that. I asked the group last night, what is the one thought? Everybody remember that I asked the question?
I do remember that.
Does anybody have an answer yet?
I can't remember the question.
Can you put context around the question?
I thought it was to awaken, but
What is the one thought that leads to awakening? Okay, then I'm going to tell the story that you've all heard before, and we'll see. Now, I don't mean to be so cute, but I will make the point.
Some people can't help but be cute.
It's been my biggest problem in life. There's no I making that, is there?
A burden.
It is. Inherent cuteness is a burden. I think I just discovered another hindrance. Bahia was revered in his community as a person of great understanding. One day in seclusion, Bahia entertained the idea of whether he was an arahant, an enlightened being, or was he lacking in some key understanding. One thought can have two different meanings. In meditation, a female diva told him that he was not yet an arahant. In my understanding, a female diva arising in my mind is simply my own thoughts. It might be a higher level thought, but either way, a female diva told him that he was not yet an arahant, an awakened one. In fact, his current practice did not have the qualities that could give rise to enlightenment. He asked the diva, or insight arose within him, as it arose with Jen, if there was one in the world who knew the way to enlightenment. The diva told Bahia of the arahant, a rightly self-awakened one who teaches his Dhamma. The Buddha was in Savatthi at the time. Bahia immediately left to find the Buddha and learn the Dhamma. He came upon a group of monks and asked if they knew where to find the Buddha. The monks told Bahia that the Buddha was on his alms round. Bahia went into town, came upon the Buddha. Bahia feared impermanence and uncertainty and was concerned that he or the Buddha may die before he, Bahia, received the Dhamma. The Buddha was serene. He was at peace. Bahia placed himself at the Buddha's feet and asked, teach me the Dhamma, awakened one. Teach me the Dhamma for my long-term welfare and lasting happiness. The Buddha replied, this is not the time, Bahia. I am on my alms round. Bahia pleaded, awaken one. No one can know for sure the dangers that there may be for you or for me. Teach me the Dhamma for my long-term benefit and welfare. A second time, the Buddha responded, "This is not the time, Bahia. I am on my alms round." Isn't this remarkable? This occurred 2,600 years ago, and yet here it is today, this great teaching. Again, Bahia pleaded, "Awaken one. No one can know for sure the dangers there may be for you or for me. Teach me the Dhamma for my long-term welfare and lasting happiness." Finally, the Buddha relented. "I will teach you the Dhamma, Bahia. Listen carefully to my words. Train yourself in this manner. In what is seen, there is only what is seen. In what is heard, there is only what is heard. In what is cognized, there is only what is cognized. In what is sensed, there is only what is sensed. This is how you should train yourself. When for you, there is what is seen, only what is seen. In what is heard, only what is heard. In what is sensed, only what is sensed. And in what is cognized, only what is cognized. Then, Bahia, there is no you in connection with what is seen. There's no I making. It's simply what's occurring. It's simply what's arising. The timeline doesn't matter. You're now fully present in your own life. When there is no you there, you are neither here nor there nor anywhere in between. You've stepped off the timeline, the continuance of ignorance. There's no you here, there, or anywhere else. And there never is. We're only present. This and only this is the end of stress and unhappiness. What's the one thought? Almost.
Something about letting go of ignorance is like.
Almost. Upon hearing the words of the Buddha, Bahia's mind cleared. Clinging, grasping, greed, and aversion ended, and all self-referential views were extinguished. Bahia awakened. So I just got to conclude the story. That's my comment. I'll pass over that.
Is it right view?
Almost.
Emptiness.
We're getting there.
Following the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path.
We're getting there. I got to find the end of the story just so I can read it and give it. Shortly after Bahia's encounter with the Buddha and his enlightenment, he was attacked and killed by a cow. He was right, wasn't he? He was right to be concerned about the impermanence of all things, including his opportunity to awaken in this lifetime and the opportunity for a Buddha, or at least his teachings, being present in the world. They don't have to be present in the world. We happen to be fortunate that they still are. At some point, they might not be. They're here now. Time to awaken is now. The Buddha, upon hearing of Bahia's death, instructed some monks to retrieve the body and to cremate it properly and prepare a memorial to Bahia. When completed, the monks, knowing Bahia's awakening, asked the Buddha what Bahia's future state would be. The Buddha replied, "Monks, Bahia was wise. He practiced the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma," and I love this line, "and did not pester me with issues unrelated to the Dhamma."
Those other guys.
Like all those other guys. Bahia,
Like asked him about his future state.
Bahia, dear monks, is totally unbound. Doesn't matter what state he is. The Buddha didn't try to describe where he went because he didn't go anywhere. There's no more Bahia. He's totally unbound. The Buddha continues and concludes, where water, earth, fire, and wind have no footing. Water, earth, fire, and wind is this form. That's what we are made of, these elements, and all of the universe. Where water, earth, fire, and wind have no footing, where they're not established, there the stars don't shine, the sun isn't visible. There the moon doesn't appear. There darkness is not found. And when a sage, a Brahmin, through great wisdom and discernment, has realized this for himself, from form and formless, from bliss and pain, he is freed. That's enough of the sutta. That's the Bahia Sutta. It speaks to impermanence, and it speaks to that great question. What's the one thought?
Take to the Dhamma.
Impermanence.
You're all around it, but we'll get to it.
Wow.
Okay. He'll answer us before we go.
You'll answer.
I think he's forgotten.
It's what?
I think you've forgotten, and you can't tell us because you've forgotten yourself.
It could be. But the declining of the faculties is present. We'll see if I've forgotten or not. But let's meditate first, and then we'll have a Dhamma teaching. So find your relaxed meditation posture. And gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And now is the time to meditate. Holding your back straight but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders. Your nose aligned, excuse me, with your navel. Holding yourself softly, gently, lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room, settle onto your seats, and settle into your bodies, and settle into your minds. Notice the sensation of breathing in your body. Become mindful of your inhalation and your exhalation, your in-breath and your out-breath. While remaining mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath, notice if feelings arise and thoughts are flowing. We are sensitive and conscious beings. Feelings arise and thoughts flow. The purpose of meditation is to increase concentration and not be distracted by the arising and passing away of feelings and thoughts. Notice the arising and passing away of your breath in your body. When you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge the distraction and return mindfulness to your breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of the arising and the passing away of your breath in your body. And we will continue to meditate for 30 minutes with callbacks every 10 minutes. gently deepening concentration by remaining mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. noticing the arising and passing away of feelings and the arising and passing away of thoughts, while remaining mindful of the arising and passing away of your breath in your body. And we'll continue to meditate for 10 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So I'm going to talk about the Paticca Samuppada Sutta, dependent origination, and probably the Phena Sutta. And I know we've covered this before, but like the Nagara Sutta, I think you heard that, all of you heard that in a way you've never heard before. You certainly experienced it in a different way. And developing understanding is just like that. You know, we as we broaden our understanding of what the Buddha taught, we apply it in different ways. Jen explained that beautifully this morning. And so hearing dependent origination over and over again is so important, because you'll hear it this morning in a way you've never heard it before, because you have a more broader understanding of it. I won't get into my comments that are in the book. You all read them all probably this morning. You've heard it, and but I will get into it a little bit. The Buddha, and this is something that we've been going over the last 4 weeks in Frenchtown, and it leads directly to this. The Buddha never addressed questions directly that would not lead to ending craving and clinging and cessation of dukkha. Answering questions about the nature of self originating from a deluded belief in self would only reinforce delusion and lead to more delusion and continued suffering. These questions were consistently left unanswered as they were improper questions rooted in ignorance. The Buddha described these questions as arising from inappropriate views, not fit for attention. These are the Buddha's words. These views will continue to generate confusion and suffering. So any engagement with these views is simply an engagement in furthering ignorance. The Buddha teaches what is fit for attention while maintaining the context of the Four Noble Truths: understanding stress, understanding the origination of stress, understanding the cessation of stress, and understanding the path leading to the cessation of stress. Relates directly to what he awakened to, the Nagara Sutta. The Buddha states, as one attends appropriately, remember how the Buddha described his mindfulness. He had developed appropriate mindfulness. When one attends appropriately in this way, 3 fetters are abandoned: identity view, doubt, and grasping at precepts and practices. I need an eye transplant quickly.
John,
Yes.
I understand clearly the first 2. It seems the ritual, was he just warning people not to attach themselves to?
Exactly. It was a common practice then, and it's such a common practice today. And the rites and rituals have now taken, in that instance, have taken the place of actually developing understanding. And the reason, again, this is very common during the Buddhist time, still common today in many of the modern schools. I was part of that. And it provides a very comforting distraction from developing the Dhamma. And that's why the Buddha literally warned against doing that. And then he put his Dhamma in context, why it's different than that.
You could also apply it to grasping at just mundane practices and
Oh, yeah.
and precepts and just ideas and views about what I need to do next. Or,
Yep, the rituals that we create in our lives that we become attached to. Having 2 cups of coffee in the morning is a ritual.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And that is
The ritual
the
that we
broader view.
developed of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we're not willing to let go of. The Buddha consistently stated, I teach the origination of dukkha and the path leading to the cessation of dukkha, nothing more. I teach the origination of, he could have easily have said, I teach the origination of distraction and the cessation of distraction, as it's the preoccupation with dukkha, with getting what we want and avoiding what we don't want, that is the continual distraction that provides for continued ignorance. In fact, ignorance requires constant distraction, or else we recognize it, just let it go. Let me just go over dependent origination briefly.
Can I just say something, John?
Please.
Sometimes when you're giving your talks, you know, you make a joke about what you just said. I need 2 cups of coffee in the morning to get me going this morning. But because I'm kind of in a mind frame when I think of you, when you make a joke like that, it really brings, I can see exactly where that thinking is going wrong, even though you're making a joke about it.
Oh, no, that's no joke. I need 2 cups of coffee every morning.
Do you know what I mean? It's like that's hammering it home what I mean about this, and you know what I mean.
I do, and that's how the Dhamma is experienced. It's a practical teaching. It applies to the scenarios in our life. It applies to needing 2 cups of coffee or 4 cups of coffee or anything else that we're clinging to.
It's so direct coming from you.
Well, I've overcome 2 cups of coffee. Now it's only 1. Thank you, Laura, for that coffee this morning.
I wasn't going to get you another one.
Now, you don't need me on 2 cups of coffee, especially when I'm talking about the Dhamma. The Buddha was at Savatthi, at Jita's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. There he addressed those assembled. Friends, I will describe in detail dependent origination. Listen carefully. And what is dependent origination? This is what the Buddha awakened to, and it's why he taught 4 noble truths. From ignorance as a requisite condition comes fabrications. We talked about where does ignorance come from? We don't need to know. All that we have to know is that in this moment, my mind is rooted in ignorance. And because of that ignorance, I've created fabrications. I've created assumptions about myself in relation to the world that are rooted in ignorance. So what are the assumptions? No matter how strongly I believe them or profess them or get other people to believe my assumptions, they're rooted in ignorance. And I can take those assumptions and project them into non-physical realms and create great scenarios about that too. And what are they? They're rooted in ignorance. From those fabrications rooted in ignorance, as a requisite condition, comes consciousness. Now, again, we're not talking about a grand cosmic unified consciousness, ongoing thinking rooted in what? Rooted in ignorance. From that consciousness, from ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance, as a requisite condition, it's required, comes name and form. You remember how the Buddha described it, getting stuck in self-referential views. From ignorance comes assumptions, comes ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance, comes now self-referential views that are what? All rooted in ignorance. And so even though now these views are solidified in this body, they are what? Rooted in ignorance. They're of absolutely no value. There's no reason to protect or defend them, the Buddha teaches. From name and form, from self-referential views, as a requisite condition, comes the 6th sense base, comes our senses. Now, the Buddha is not describing, this is not a creation story, although the modern interpretations based on the Abhidhamma claim that this is the Buddha's teaching how all the worlds came into being. There's nothing that relates to creation in here, does it? What the Buddha is talking about is the creation of suffering rooted in ignorance. And so the progression isn't lineal, and you could almost say that this whole experience of these 12 causative links ending up in suffering is outside of time. And the reason why I say that is that it's not a linear thing, although we can observe it. It happens in our mind so quickly and continuously that time is irrelevant to it. We can't find a beginning or an end to this, but we can have an experience of the end of it.
It's like a little world.
It's a little whirlpool. It's that entire self-referential feedback loop that we get caught into, that the Buddha is describing now in simply more detail so we can understand it. So we can apply some useful discretion to these as these things arise in our own mind. From the sixth sense base, as a requisite condition, comes contact. It simply makes sense. I need to have a physical vehicle to have contact with the outside world, don't I? It's just a practical statement. Take a look at this. It's your senses that you come in contact with and create craving and grasping out of. From contact as a requisite condition, it requires contact, comes feeling. How could I feel anything if I did not have these senses? And because these senses because my interpretation of what's occurring to these senses is rooted in ignorance, my interpretation is rooted in ignorance. So no matter how real I might insist that my interpretations are, they're not. They're like an illusion because they're not based in reality. They're not based in what's occurring. From feeling as a requisite condition comes craving. We first have to feel something, whatever it might be, in order for craving to develop, but it will not develop if the feeling is felt simply as a feeling and not as a self-referential feeling. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging and maintaining. Once that craving is set in and established in ignorance, then we cling to it. And it's that clinging that allows for the maintenance of, now remember, where this whole started, in ignorance. So now we're clinging to ignorance and we're doing everything we can to maintain that ignorance as a requisite condition. From clinging and maintaining as a requisite condition comes becoming. Becoming what? Becoming further ignorant. And that's the important reference to this. We're not becoming grand cosmic beings. We're becoming human beings rooted in ignorance. From becoming as a requisite condition comes birth. Notice the progression here. Now, if we apply this to physical birth, what are we talking about here? We've created a mind rooted in ignorance that has given birth to a physical experience that is rooted in ignorance. But more skillfully looked at in relation to the Dhamma, it's what I'm giving birth to in this moment. What's the one thought?
This is not me. This is not myself.
Oh man, I was gonna say that. I was gonna say that before.
You can.
Yeah,
You're
I know, it's always
Couple gold stars.
Say that, it's always like, nah.
Give me a half a point.
in every occurrence, if we can hold in mind that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. Any variant of this is not me is an expression of an awakened mind. And every time we're able to hold that mind, at least in that moment, we're expressing an arahant's view, a rightly self-awakened one's view.
So you experience profound understanding and insight to 3 marks.
That's what Kandana got when he awakened, when he heard the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Another way of saying that is all conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation, including the view that this is me. The right view is this is not me.
So there's no longer ignorance.
There's no longer ignorance. It's ignorance that the progression says establishes a self that would say, well, this is me. Wisdom says this is not me. And where does that leave us?
Empty of ignorance.
Empty of ignorance, empty of clinging. We're free. We're liberated. Yes, you did. All of your answers, as we've gotten up to the right answer, included that understanding of this is not me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He didn't answer in the form of a question. So.
Well, actually, I asked the question: is what is the one thought? This is, we can go. Let's go to Dairy Queen. We're done. And just remember that is not me either.
So when you were talking about or earlier when you introduced, you said, what is seen is only what is seen, and what is heard is only what is heard. And up until now, what I was hearing was the Buddha was saying, don't add to what's seen, don't add to what's heard, don't attach to what's seen, don't attach to what's heard. But also, if I saw this other way of looking at it, only what is seen, only what is heard. What is seen is only what is seen. If I am perceiving that, then that's the only possibility of bliss.
That's one way of seeing. Yes,
There's another way.
there's an infinite number of ways of interpreting whatever is arising, including a tree.
Right.
If we're a botanist, we might understand how the tree forms and why its leaves are this way, and
Right.
so that's from that point of view. From a self-referential point of view, that might prefer oak trees over ash trees.
Mhm.
Why am I stuck in this forest of ash trees?
Yeah.
I can't stand it. I want to be in an oak forest. That sounds pretty silly, and maybe too simple, but that's just what we do when we start attaching ourselves. I need this and I don't need that. And we do it with an infinite number of objects, events, views, and ideas. We attach ourselves to it through I-making, through saying, this is me, this is what I need. And it could be, and it could be, and it is any object that we attach ourselves to. So a liberated mind is not attached to anything. And as Jen is really bringing out, then we're open to everything. That's the essence. Often people talk about a meditation practice develops a spacious mind. In this practice, it truly does. It's a mind that allows for everything and resists nothing. And makes decisions on what is appropriate based in wisdom, not on acquiring things, not on I-making. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not what I am.
I remember being on a walk once down by the river, and I was watching my mind looking at all the trees and saying, oak tree, ash, oh, there's a sycamore. And it just went on and on and on. And it just completely ruined the whole beauty of the walk because my mind was rattling on, trying to identify trees and find attributes to them. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
This is just, I'm just blowing the whole moment here.
Instead of just being present with all of what's occurring.
Yes, and there's so much gorgeousness there. All I have to do is walk down that path.
And that's a true unity consciousness because it's not discriminating. It's not saying, I like this, I don't like that. It's able, that mind that you had at that moment and continues, is able to take in everything just as it is without the need for it to be any different. Liz.
Lorna talked about this in class one day, I think it was you, where you were talking about you in a moment, you could see the two things happening at the same time, identifying, acknowledging, but that it was almost as if you had a separate mind that was at peace with that moment. These other things, it was like having two minds. So two things were happening at the same time, but the mind was not reacting. It was just acknowledging what was happening.
Yeah. That's, please.
Sorry.
That's okay.
This is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. Is a little bit difficult to grasp in a moment outside of a Dharma class, sort of out in the world. You can just cut it down. Can you just cut it down to this is just nothing to do with me? This is nothing to do with me.
Don't take anything personally.
What is I'm thinking about that it is nothing to do with me. It all boils down to that. Could you
So it
put that thought instead of this is not me, this is not mine, this is not what I am, who I am. It goes difficult to sort of get when you're sort of driving or something.
It goes back to what we talked about earlier in wanting to be the world's best teacher. What is your intention This is why that second factor of the Eightfold Path is so important. The right intention is the intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. So and another way of saying that is to remind ourselves, this is not me, this is not mine. And the underlying support for being able to maintain that is understanding the Eightfold Path and right intention. In each and every moment, we have, as Dhamma practitioners, we are maybe at first tacitly, but ultimately completely embracing that right intention, that in each and every moment, I am mindful of recognizing and abandoning craving and clinging. And so the practical application of that is, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not what I am. It's practicing, you remember the talks on restraint. It's practicing restraint, and it relates directly to dependent origination at the point of contact. So I've said often that if we understand any one of these chains, the dependent origination is often called the 12-link chain of dependencies. If we can recognize any one of the links in the chain and abandon that or break the chain, the whole process of suffering rooted in ignorance falls apart. So if we can practice restraint at craving and clinging, we will eventually, but rather quickly, get to seeing everything in an impersonal way. Great question. Becky?
I'm going back to Rom's walk with the trees.
Yeah, I want to go back there too.
If your intention is, like you said with Jen, not to be the best teacher in the world and not for everybody to know I'm the best teacher in the world, but if you're walking through the woods, for example, and you have the right intention, or you're not taking, the trees personally. You're not wanting to go up there and cut the dead branches off the trees to make them perfect for you. But you are just enjoying the trees. If you know that the tree is a sycamore, and you know that this tree is an oak, and you're in the forest with the trees, can't that enhance and expand your experience rather than narrowing it? Is there a way to appreciate or to take joy in understanding how the tree works at the same time as seeing how beautiful and how incredible the tree is?
People are noticing my reaction, and I'm ready to jump up. Yes, and intention is the important point, because if I'm enamored with the fact that I know that that's a sycamore and that's an oak and that's an ash, I'm an ass. I'm stuck in eye making. But if I'm appreciating the diversity of the world we live in, that's an exquisite example of mindfulness.
It's totally.
And it's going back to the same experience or the same thought is either supporting awakening or supporting ignorance, depending on the intention behind it. And if the intention is eye making, we're going to continue suffering. If it's simply an acknowledgement of the truth of what's occurring, and the truth might be that I am the most wonderful teacher. It's just the truth. It's what is occurring. And I'm in a forest of diversity, meaning the world that we live in. Think about taking that scenario and bringing it into the world we live in today. And if we could simply acknowledge and be at peace with diversity, there would never be any conflict in the world. But we can't, can we? We need to pick apart and categorize things that we like, things that we approve, and we do it in all kinds of ways, not just the obvious ways of racial or religious or ideological. We do it in every single thing. Rather than walking in the diversity of the world we live in and being at peace with everything that arises. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. Kevin, what a great discussion.
You described this before as the personalization and the depersonalization of
Right.
worldly phenomena.
Yes.
And for instance, with Ram's walk, the contact is going to happen. I mean, you can't walk down a path with your eyes closed. So when your eyes are open, you contact a sycamore tree, and I just saw a sycamore tree. It's a beautiful sycamore tree. And then you keep walking. But if you keep searching for trees, then Ram's hitting on that subtlety of the distraction.
As soon as you name the tree, you already craft the path.
Yeah, or there's a tree. I think I know what it was, but if you keep walking, and then you haven't attached to it. But if you start looking at that tree and really looking at it, and then looking at all the other trees, you become wrapped up in that process of contact.
Yes, and so what? Relating ignorance to a danger, which it really is. What's the safest way to walk down the path? With an awakened mind. What's the safest way to live in the world? Recognizing that this is not me. This is not mine. The Buddha often talks about becoming disenchanted with the world. To most people, that would sound like, why would I want to do that? That's so contrary to everything, isn't that? That's so negative. By the way, the Buddha teaches, it's called via negativa, to point out not how awful the world is, how awful we make the world through our own wrong views. I might get into that a little bit later. I was thinking about that. How are we going to walk down the path of our life? It's our choice.
You said something last night about it wasn't passion, and the reverse of passion leads to stress. It really, I was going to listen to the tape again just for that moment to hear that again, exactly what you said.
It wasn't just passion, it was like
It wasn't passion.
joy or
Yes, joy.
delight.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Delight. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we are,
Or maybe it was a different.
and how delight leads to fear and fear leads to stress. Yes, those, I like to take credit for those words, but I was just reading the Buddha's words.
That hit home for me last night. It's a chain. They're all linked.
And so somebody remind me to talk about South Point, because it makes a good point. We're taught to be delighted with our life, and if we're not, there's something wrong with us. This all goes back to, it goes way beyond where the reference that I'll make, but in modern times, we have the power of positive thinking. We've all heard about that. There was some people that made a whole living teaching that we should always look at things in a positive way and never have a negative thought. That's the most contradictory to the Buddha's teaching of any thought that we can have, because the Buddha taught via negativa. We have to be willing to look at the negative if we're going to extricate ourselves from it. We have to know where we are. It takes great courage to be willing to overcome that conditioning that I need to be delighted with everything and look at the problem of ignorance. So South Point, those of you that have been to South Point, Hawaii, the most southern point in the United States. And it's this little strip of land that kind of hangs off the big island of Hawaii. And as you drive down there, because of the constant wind, all the trees are leaning one way. And I was leading a small group one day, and someone was in the back of this little bus that I was driving. I used to leave these kind of silly, I was telling, a little embarrassed to say, but these kind of eco-spiritual tours in Hawaii.
That sounds perfectly fine.
That was at the time. It's when I think back of, I wasn't speaking the Dhamma then. It was fun, and actually it was. I'm disrespecting some of my Hawaiian teachers, and I mean no disrespect. It was where I was, and they were wonderful people. Anyway, so we're driving down to South Point, and these trees are over like this, and out of the back says, "Why doesn't somebody just cut those damn trees down?" But it's such a remarkable phenomenon to think that what the environment did to these trees, and yet they're still there, and they're thriving. They're just a little bent, like your Dhamma teacher is a little bent. Let's get back to it. It's really remarkable. We've been talking about this for a while, me and Matt. We just mentioned it this morning, how far this Sangha has come in their understanding, that we can have conversations based on something that for most people it would sound like it's nonsense. Like we shouldn't be delighted. It doesn't, and we understand that not being delighted with life allows us to enjoy all of life, or to be present with all, which is a better way of saying it, not enjoy it, but to be present with our life What is more fulfilling than to be able to be present with what's occurring?
John,
Yes, please.
go back to Rom's walk.
Yes. We can't get out of that. That's,
Wasn't he
I think
practicing?
we're clinging to your walk, Ron.
Wasn't he practicing mindfulness? Because part of mindfulness is also knowing when you're not present.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Visibility.
his,
Right,
yeah.
his development of his practice allowed him to realize that.
Yes, and the subtlety that was in what it comes to, and what Becky brought up too, it wasn't noticing the sycamore and the oak and the ash. If you're noticing it in a self-referential way, I prefer the sycamore over the oak, over the ash. Why are there? What's
There's
an oak?
prettier one of those over there.
Or
That's where the eye making is.
Judgment.
But simply being present and understanding the diversity of where you are.
He
Is-
chastised himself for not enjoying this walk, but really he was practicing mindfulness.
Yeah.
Well, he was acknowledging the fact that he was
Yeah, it got
distracted,
to be
which is
so
part of it.
yeah, it got to be so obsessive that I finally realized that I was like really screwing things up here.
yeah, you were distracted by
My
that.
mind was,
But
like,
what
completely
David is
taken
saying,
over the experience.
what David is saying is the recognition of the distraction is an aspect of
Oh, yeah.
mindfulness.
Yeah.
And it is. That's how the Dhamma develops. It's first by noticing, and it's exactly that. It's such a good description of noticing your eye making.
But also as a woodworker.
Well,
Right, even that was
Yeah.
part of it, but, you know,
Yeah, to
but
be
my mind had
compelled.
already, you know, it just got to be, instead of enjoying a walk, my
You were
mind was walking down the path. I wasn't walking down the path.
yeah. So the scenario to the just observing it looks the same. It's a guy walking down the path. It's what's occurring in your mind. What are you holding in? That's the essence of mindfulness. What are you holding in mind as you're walking down the path?
I am reminded of I think a story of Tom Sorrows. I was playing somewhere in France, and teacher and one of the people in the work group were standing around, and there was a nice sunset, and the pupil said, "Isn't it a beautiful sunset?" And the teacher kind of gave him a dope flop back his head, says, "You're not here to watch the sunset. You're here to watch your mind watching the sunset."
That's funny.
That's great. All right,
That's great.
let's get.
Don't give John any ideas.
I like
He dope slapping us
All
all
right.
day.
I was thinking there was two of you that fell asleep last night during meditation, and that's fine. You know, sometimes when you're really tired, it's better to get a little rest, even during meditation. But it reminded me of when I used to hang out at Sen Mountain Monastery. They have a tool called a kayasaka, and it's usually made out of bamboo, sometimes teak, that it's about a yard long, and it's split 2/3 of the way. And the retreat master walks around the room. If he notices that you're dropping off a little bit, or maybe even out of position, he'll stand in front of you, and you'll feel his presence. And what he's doing is asking you for permission to wake you up. And what you do is you look up and you say, "Okay," I'll give you a little whack. It's all meant with great intention. Notice that I don't do it though. But I thought about it last night. I'm not pointing out who was sleeping, but there were two of you that could have. And the reason why I'm even talking about this is sometimes it is more important to get a good rest than to meditate. Meditation alone is not it. Sometimes taking care of your physical needs is as important. Okay. From becoming as a requisite condition comes birth. From birth as a requisite condition, remember what birth we're talking about here. From birth as a requisite condition comes aging, sickness, death, sorrow, regret, pain, distress, and despair. And then here the Buddha describes in slightly more detail and in reverse order the 12 links. Now, what is aging and death? Aging is decrepitude, brokenness. I don't mind to being such a good example of this, by the way. Brokenness, graying, decline, weakening of the faculties. Death is the passing away of the 5 clinging aggregates the ending of time, and the interruption in the life faculties. Now, what is birth? Birth is the descent, the coming forth. Coming forth from what? Doesn't matter. Coming forth into ignorance. The coming to be. Birth is the appearance of the sixth sense base and the five clinging aggregates. Now, what is becoming? Becoming is sensual becoming, form becoming, and formless becoming. Remember when we were talking about Vacchagoda and Anurata, the Buddhist said, this is what I teach. I teach that form is not self, perception is not self, fabrications are not self, consciousness is not self. The five clinging aggregates are not self. And as we've covered this before, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the commentary on it. And what is clinging and maintaining? There are four types of clinging. Clinging to sensory stimulus, clinging to views or conditioned thinking, clinging to precepts and practices. I got to have 2 cups of coffee. Or I need to do, there's a modern Buddhist practice that I took my vows in that states that you must do 108,000 perfect prostrations, meaning from a standing position, you lay down, put your head on the floor, stand up. That's one. You need to do 108,000 of those before you can begin Dhamma practice. And that is taught. I wasn't into it, so I stopped doing it. But now think about it. What it teaches, obviously, is great devotion to that religion. You must have it. But does it teach anything about dependent origination? But it's a worldwide practice and ritual. The Buddha was warning it. But I thought we might try it here. We might introduce it to Cross River meditation.
It would prove aging and decrepitude.
Well, I thought we
reinforce that.
I maybe
have
we,
trouble sitting in the right pose. Never mind getting up and down with my forehead.
and you've all seen people of there's I'm not going to go there because it sounds like I'm making fun. I don't mean to make fun of anybody's belief, but
I've seen the video of
pilgrims doing it
with little wooden things
They
on
have
their
little
knees.
wooden
Yes.
Because they'll wear out
the wear out the hands. And again, not to put that scenario down, we're getting a good grasp of the absurdity of eye making, because look at what it drives us to do. And when you look at that way, the world is absurd, and it's a good Dhamma practice to recognize the absurdity in it, because it brings a lightness to it. We don't condemn our actions or anybody else's actions because we understand where it comes from. It's just rooted in eye making.
They're in good physical shape.
They're in great physical shape. And they don't have a lot of other worries except getting to their destination, do they?
Getting up and down.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it that way, it's not bad if you're inclined that way.
108 times a day for like 3 years, a little over 3 years, right?
What's that?
If you did it 108 times a day.
Oh, yeah, it
for
takes a
like
long
just over
time.
3 years.
Yeah.
No, you
I know-
said 180,000?
108,000.
Oh, 108.
To me,
1,000 days.
just keeping track would be.
That's way more than, well.
108 for 1,000 days.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm doing that.
It's a long time.
We're clinging to that.
What's your intention?
Clinging to sensory stimulus, clinging to views, clinging to precepts and practice, and clinging to a doctrine of self. That's what ignorance is. Ignorance is a continued doctrine of self. In other words, we've created a doctrinal worship of what? Something rooted in ignorance. And now, once that's established, I have to defend it, and I have to do everything I can to maintain it. Or I can let go of those views. I can become unbound, released from clinging. Let me get to the end of the street. And what is craving? There are 6 classes of craving. Craving for forms, craving for sounds, craving for smells, craving for taste, craving for physical sensations, and craving for ideas. Again, relating to the 6th sense base. And what is feeling? Feeling has 6 classes as well. Feeling arising from eye contact, arising from ear contact, arising from nose contact, arising from taste contact, feeling arising from body contact, and feeling arises from intellect contact. A lot of detail in there, but the Buddha is teaching that, in a sense, every one of our senses has its own consciousness. And it's interpreted that way, often from the ignorance of the other senses. In other words, we're not taking in the great diversity of things because something has now caught my eye that's appealing, and I don't care anymore what my other senses might be telling me, because now I'm interpreting it. It's impacting my consciousness from that isolated point of view, from eye consciousness. And when I do that, now I'm creating a condition that is interpreted continually through eye contact. And I can become someone who is enamored with colors and objects as opposed to seeing things in their complete diversity. And so I only like blue skies. I don't like gray skies. Or I only like blue shirts, and I don't like gray shirts. And we start, Jen mentioned this before, we start creating such a narrow ego tube of living in. We're so limited by these views that we think we need to see the world through. And it's all rooted in what? In eye-making and ignorance. This is called feeling. I'm taking this. I'm not going to go back and read it. You understand the context. And what is contact? Phenomena contacting the eye, phenomena contacting the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, phenomena contacting the intellect. So we can't, if our minds are rooted in ignorance, we can no longer trust the danger in interpreting that way. I can't trust my own thinking. I can't trust my intellect. And we literally can't. I mean, we can function well in the world and not develop the Dhamma. But if we want to end stress, we have to recognize that I can no longer trust my views until I understand that I have now established myself in right view. And again, this shouldn't limit us in our world. We shouldn't stop participating until we're awakened. The Buddha certainly didn't. But we should recognize that if there's stress arising in our life, if there's eye-making, where it's coming from. And it points us right back to the important question of developing understanding of the Dhamma. This is contact with the sixth sense base. And, and what is name and form? Name and form is feeling, perceptions, intention, attention, all those mental aspects, and contact. Discriminating self-referential consciousness is name. The elements of water, fire, earth, and wind, that which makes up physical forms, is called form. Name and form is discriminating consciousness bound to clinging to physical form.
Can you say that again?
Yes, thank you for asking. Name and form, self-referential view, self-identification, is discriminating consciousness bound to or clinging to physical form. This is just another way of describing that feedback loop that the Buddha described in his Awakening in the Nagara Sutta.
Discriminating consciousness.
Yes, I like this, I don't like that.
But it's
I
bound.
am this, I am not that.
But
And-
it's bound to form.
Bound through ignorance to this form. So then this becomes the experience of the ego tube. Another description of the ego tube is the five clinging aggregates, the ongoing personal experience of suffering. I think we should change it to ego tube, though.
That was Matt.
Well, our own channel.
Pardon me?
The Ego Tube channel.
The ego tube.
Me too.
All classes,
Me too. That's great.
all classes will be streamed through YouTube.
That's great. I think I'm gonna change the YouTube channel name from Cross River Meditation Channel to the Me Too
Just start
channel.
selling shirts that say Me Too. It's a funny joke. Funny
Raise
joke.
money for the CrossFit meditation.
Yeah. And what is consciousness? Guess what? There's 6 classes of consciousness: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and intellect consciousness. And what are fabrications? There are 3 fabrications: bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. The Buddha is just describing how do we express our ignorance? Through thought, word, and deed. The Buddha describes ignorance. And by the way, there probably in about a month, there's been an article I've been writing on to get in. And Diane, who's not here, asked me over and over again, can you please describe ignorance? And the only way to describe ignorance is in connection with dukkha. And so I'm saying in about a month. It might be about a year. But there's 3 or maybe 4 suttas that include a description of ignorance in relation to dukkha. And we're going to get to it at CRMC soon. The Buddha says, and what is ignorance? Ignorance is not knowing stress. Remember how dependent origination starts. From ignorance through 12 observable causative links, all manner of stress arises. So ignorance is not understanding stress. Ignorance is not knowing the origination of stress. It's not knowing craving and clinging. Now, when the Buddha is talking about not knowing, he's pointing to what we should know, the knowledge that he gained. Vision arose, insight arose, illuminating insight arose, with things never heard before, never known before. What was never known before is an understanding of ignorance. This is what the Buddha awakened to and brought into the world. Think about that, how profound that is. Up until that point, now as human beings, we've been developing for a million years. Millions of years. We don't know how long. But we never were aware of the common problem of ignorance. That's the brilliance of what Siddhartha Gautama awakened to. And he described the solution to that as Four Noble Truths. Not knowing the origination of stress, not knowing the cessation of stress. Again, these relate directly to Four Noble Truths, don't they? Not knowing the Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of stress. This is called ignorance. I want to read that once more. You know that I get repetitive. And what is ignorance? Ignorance is not knowing stress. First Noble Truth, dukkha occurs. Not knowing the origination of stress. Craving originates and clinging perpetuates stress. Not knowing the cessation of stress. The Third Noble Truth, which points directly to impermanence. It's possible to bring this to cessation. And not knowing the Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of stress. This is called ignorance. When you hear the Buddhist teachings in this clear and direct way, how could we have gotten so lost? How could we misunderstand these teachings? It's the Eightfold Path that leads to the cessation of stress. Now, from the remainderless fading and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of fabrications. Remember how we started. From ignorance as a requisite condition comes fabrications. From the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of fabrications. Remainderless means that ultimately in our minds, in our awakened minds, there's not a shred of ignorance left. This is what we're striving for recognizing and abandoning all the ignorance that we have incorporated into our lives and into our minds. Excuse me. From the cessation of fabrications comes the cessation of consciousness. It certainly doesn't mean we lose the ability to think. We simply lose thinking rooted in ignorance. From the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of name and form. From the cessation of thinking rooted in ignorance comes the cessation of self-referential views. And it's just that way. It simply falls away. Walking up there. From the cessation of name and form comes the cessation of the sixth sense base. From the cessation of the sixth sense base comes the cessation of contact. Now again, we have to keep this in context. The Buddha is not saying that we then just become blobs of humanity with no access to the outside world. We're no longer using ignorance to interpret what we're coming in contact with. It's the cessation of ignorant contact or contact rooted in ignorance. From the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling, meaning using feelings to continually justify our ignorance. From the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of craving. We're no longer craving for self-establishment, for maintaining self-referential views. And from the cessation of craving comes the cessation of clinging and maintaining those views. Do you see the process of undoing, of unbinding? The Buddha is describing it. Now, for most of us, we won't be completely mindful of each and every one of these steps. We don't have to be. But what we gain through refined mindfulness is an observation of it occurring in our life, because now we are present for what's actually occurring in this unified mind and body. Laura, you had a question or comment?
Well, I feel like when you at least become less ignorant, or maybe not fully, maybe it's not remainderless, but I feel like there becomes this different loop of non-ignorance where like the feelings and perceptions inform continued mindfulness and are a continued reminder of the vulnerable truths, and they become a function of walking this path to awakening. So I just for like the whole sixth sense space for me, I found over the past year it's really allowed me to recognize when I'm clinging and craving, just kind of that gentle awareness of it.
Yeah.
So it's a function. It becomes a function, not I'm not identifying with the feeling as mine, but as just an informant.
Yes. And so again, the same scenario interpreted from a developing right view does not lead to further ignorance then. And we're using so the sixth sense space shouldn't be seen as the problem. It's simply how we use the sixth sense space that's the problem.
Or they can become indicators.
Yes, and so we use the sixth sense space. This is why we need a framework of the Eightfold Path. We're exactly the same human beings, but because our thinking is now inclined towards awakening, we're interpreting things not rooted in ignorance anymore. We're interpreting our experience framed by the Eightfold Path rooted in wisdom. And that's why it's called the path of wisdom. It's actually called a threefold path of wisdom, virtue, and concentration, ultimately leading to right view. And so, Laura, you're describing it in a very subtle but profound way, developing right view. And how would we do it? We do it within the problem of dukkha. Engaging in the Eightfold Path is not an immediate escape from suffering. It's actually a deep immersion in suffering and dukkha, but from a viewpoint that can understand it now and not simply have aversion to it. Greed, aversion, and deluded thinking. Radical acceptance and wise thinking, informed thinking. And that's really what, again, another way of saying a complete lack of I-making is a complete acceptance of life as life occurs. That's why I often refer to this path as a path of radical acceptance. And we learn the ability to separate radical acceptance from approval. We learn that we don't have to and we should not approve or disapprove of anything. We learn that we accept things. Why? Because they're occurring. That's all. And how foolish it is to have something that's occurring and not be accepting of it. It's occurred. It can't be anything that occurs cannot be anything different than it is, can it? In what is seen, there is only what is seen. No matter how egregious it might be or how much we might want to attach it to have more of it. It's simply what is seen. It's what is heard.
I often joke with people that say, I just cannot accept that. Well, let me know when you have a problem with gravity. I'll come and walk.
Yeah, that's right. We have an awakened mind accepts everything. Now, that awakened mind might not approve of everything. In fact, it will find a lot of things that fall outside of understanding, but it accepts it because of what's occurred. And that brings us the ability to have true and a profound understanding of the suffering of the world in a way that we could never have outside of that. We don't lose the ability to feel. We gain the ability to feel deeply and appropriately no matter what's occurring. And again, that's just another way of saying we're completely present for our life as our life occurs. And then we move on. Then we continue our progression of awakening, or we continue our progression of living an awakened life. Let me continue. From the cessation of becoming comes the cessation of birth. From the cessation of, now remember, most importantly is giving birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. From the cessation of birth, another moment giving birth to another moment rooted in ignorance, comes the cessation of sickness, aging, death, sorrow, pain, distress, despair, and confusion. Now, the Buddha is certainly not saying that if we awaken, we'll never be sick. If we awaken, we'll never age. If we awaken, we'll never have distress. What he's saying is we'll stop reacting to it. We'll stop needing things to be different than they are. So when I have a cold, I won't be boo-hoo, and am I going to feel better? I'll understand this is a temporary condition that's part of having a human life. And as I'm starting to feel a little bit older, and maybe not seeing as well or walking as well as I used to, I'll understand it. It comes with the package that goes along with the opportunity to awaken. So it doesn't matter. What's most important? Get it done before the cows get you. That's all.
The cows are coming.
They're coming for all of us.
Cue the cow.
Wisdom brings a cessation to the entire mass of stress and suffering. That's the end of the Paticca Sutta. Like all of the Buddha Sutta, every sutta contains everything we need to awaken. Some suttas are not as clear. So you've heard me say this before, there are some suttas that are superior in that they are required to understand and put in context some of the inferior suttas. So the superior suttas would be dependent origin, Paticca the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Anatta-Lakkhana Sutta, and the Fire Discourse, which we may or may not get to. But I'll certainly mention them and give a concise description of them to keep everything in context. And so the slightly inferior, but not in importance, simply that you need the other context, is what we're going to get to this afternoon, is the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta. And then you can look at even something like the Nagara Sutta as even inferior to those, because we really need the superior suttas to understand the Nagara Sutta. If you happen to come across the Nagara Sutta in Newsweek magazine, that's still around, I don't know, it would seem like complete nonsense to you. This Buddha was just a maniac. This doesn't make any sense, because you didn't have the context to see it. But because you have, we were able to have that profound experience of hearing the Buddha's words again in the right context. So this is a superior sutta. It's necessary for developing the rest of the understanding of what the Buddha taught. But the most important thing to remember is that it is from ignorance through 12 links. In fact, you could even leave that out. Just remember that from ignorance, suffering arises. So if we don't want any more suffering or stress in our lives, what do? Get rid of ignorance. What's that thought? Isn't that a great song? It's gotten a little bit late. I just want to, and I promise not to comment too much, but I want to get through the Phena Sutta, not in a way that I should, but I think it's important to keep the context of it. Is that it? That's it. This is a quick sutta too. The Phena Sutta. The Buddha was staying with the Avijans, on the banks of the Ganges River, or is it the Ganges River? He addressed those assembled. Friends, suppose that a large glob of foam were floating down the river, and a person with good eyesight saw it and clearly examined it. To them it would appear empty, void, without any substance. For what substance could there be in a glob of foam? In the same way, any practitioner well versed in the Dhamma observes and appropriately examines any form that is past, future, or present, any form that is internal or external, obvious or subtle, common or extraordinary, near or far. To those well versed in the Dhamma, it would appear empty, void, and without any substance. For what substance could there be in form that is constantly changing? This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. Now, suppose that in the rainy season it is raining fat, heavy drops, and a water bubble appears and disappears on the water. A person with good eyesight sees this and clearly examines it. The water bubble would appear empty, void, and without substance. For what substance could there be in a water bubble? In the same way, any practitioner well versed in the Dhamma observes and appropriately examines any feeling that is past, future, or present, any feeling that is internal or external, obvious or subtle, common or extraordinary, near or far. To those well versed in the Dhamma, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance could there be in feelings that are constantly changing? Now, suppose during the hot season a mirage was simmering. A person with good eyesight sees it and clearly examines it. The image would appear empty, void, and without substance. For what substance could there be in a mirage that is constantly changing? What substance could there be in anything that's a permanent, in anything that is constantly changing? In the same way, any practitioner well versed in the Dhamma observes and appropriately examines any perception that is past, future, or present, any perception that is internal, external, obvious or subtle, common or extraordinary, near or far. What's he referring to here? Five clinging aggregates. To anyone well versed in the Dhamma, it would appear empty, void, and without substance. For what substance could there be in perceptions that are constantly changing? What substance could there be in our perceptions that are constantly changing? What substance could there be in our feelings that are constantly changing? Yet we describe our lives by how we feel. I'm feeling good today. I'm feeling great. It's always changing. Why attach to it? And then we attach to the feeling great. And anything that might happen that makes us not feel great is a problem now. It's a stressor in our lives. Why? Because I'm attached to a feeling. But there's no substance to it. It's like foam on the water. It's a glob of foam. And yet I glom onto it because I think I need it to be me. I need it to be happy. I need it to be safe and secure. Now, suppose that a person with good eyesight, certainly not me, is seeking heartwood. It was such a great line. Matt and Kevin were talking at, and the line, the word was, this Sangha has the heartwood of the Dhamma. And we do. And that doesn't just happen. It comes from all of your right efforts. In seeking heartwood, they went to a forest with a sharp axe. There they find a large banana tree. They cut it at the root and remove the top. They peel away the outer skin and fail to find even sapwood. A banana tree doesn't have heartwood. Not wrong with it. Not all wood has heartwood. It's good, strong wood that you can build something out of. And so the Buddha is using that as a metaphor. There's nothing there. There's nothing. There's no heartwood of the Dhamma. There's nothing. There's no strength to what you're acquiring.
You're all supported.
Yes. And fail to find even sapwood, to say nothing of finding heartwood. Having good eyesight, they clearly examine the banana tree. The tree would appear empty, void, without substance. So it has a function, but it has no useful function in the Dhamma. There's no heartwood in it. Without substance. With regard to heartwood, for what substance could there be? What heartwood could there be in a banana tree? It's not. It doesn't possess it. It's not capable of producing heartwood. In the same way, any practitioner well versed in the Dhamma observes and appropriately examines any fabrications that are past, present, or future, any feeling that is internal or external, obvious or subtle, common or external, or near or far. To those well versed in the Dhamma, fabrications would appear empty, void, without substance. So we're learning to not give any credence to the assumptions, to the fabrications we've created out of ignorance. Do you see how this relates directly to the dependent origination? Yes?
Yes.
But yeah, you have to verbalize because I can't see if you're shaking your head. Yeah, but I should explain it. By the condition I have, I'm losing detail. So I know who you all are, mostly because I know your form, but I can't really see expressions, which is kind of an interesting way to live your life. So it's not all that it's interesting. Not always pleasant, but interesting. For what substance could there be in fabrications that are constantly changing? Or think about some of the assumptions you've made and changed, the things that were most important to you. And as you grew and you had different experiences, you realized that those fabrications no longer fit your view. And you simply let them go, didn't you? Because you had to let them go to fit the new fabrication. Well, we can do the same thing with all fabrications, is simply let them go. And what's left? No fabrications. Simply wisdom. Simply a true experience of human life as human life unfolds, which is the whole point of the Dhamma, having a meaningful and realistic human life.
I think this sutta brings out how daft referential views are.
Yeah.
It's just all a lot of silliness, It's,
Yeah.
it's just daft to even believe in them.
Yeah.
But I know we don't. But this sutta really speaks to me that way.
That's a good word, daft. The Buddha would often say, the wise know the danger and even the slightest discretion. The wise know the danger and even the slightest daftness. Really good word. We understand. So we might, as we're developing wisdom, we'll understand, and Laura pointed this out too just before, we understand the danger of even the shred of ignorance. And that keeps us focused on what we need to do. It keeps us focused within right effort by understanding that. Now suppose a magician, Now suppose a magician were to display a magic trick, and a person with good eyesight clearly sees the trick. The trick would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance could there be in a magic trick? In the same way, any practitioner well-versed in the Dhamma observes and appropriately examines any consciousness that is past, future, or present, any consciousness that is internal or external. Notice that wrong views rooted in thinking can manifest anywhere. It's not just within our minds. It's we objectify our thinking outside, and we do that all the time. We objectify it into trees, into chocolate cake, into other people, into ideas and ideologies and other wrong views. Any consciousness that is internal or external, obvious or subtle, common or extraordinary, near or far. To those well-versed in the Dhamma, any consciousness would appear empty, void, without substance, becoming disenchanted with our thinking. To a well-versed Dhamma instructor, we become disenchanted with our thinking. That's such a powerful understanding, because it's the problem of being enchanted with our thinking. By thinking that our thinking is correct, that we hold on to it. When we realize that it's wrong views rooted in ignorance, that's the problem. But also, this teaching is so important because it shows us that there's no value in holding on to these thoughts, to these wrong views. They're like a glob of foam. Why hold on to it? For what substance could there be in consciousness that is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths? Seeing these five aggregates clearly, the well-instructed follower of the Dhamma grows disenchanted with form. They grow disenchanted with feelings, disenchanted with perceptions, disenchanted with fabrications, and disenchanted with thinking rooted in ignorance. They grow disenchanted with the five clinging aggregates. They grow disenchanted with the ongoing personal experience of suffering. We're sick of it. And we realize that we're the cause of it, and we simply let it go. And the aggregates then unbind. We still are form. We are still feelings. We're feeling human beings. We have perceptions. Hopefully we're not creating false assumptions, fabrications, and we still have thinking. From the appearance, it looks the same, doesn't it? But because we are no longer clinging these aggregates together to describe a self, remember the aggregates themselves are all impermanent, we freed ourselves from the five clinging aggregates, and now we are simply a physical and a mental and physical reference point in the ongoing continuation of becoming awakened. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself.
Empty of ignorance.
Empty of ignorance. Disenchanted, they grow dispassionate. We lose the passion for maintaining self-referential views. It doesn't mean we're not passionate about the Dhamma. It doesn't mean we're not passionate about human life, but there's no I-making in it. The ongoing example of an awakened human being who spent 45 years teaching this is the essence of informed passion. Because it took that kind of passion. It was a whole lot more difficult to teach during the Buddhist time than it is even in our time. Just the physical experience of that. And yet for 45 years, every moment of his life was teaching the Dhamma rooted in the passion to do so. But there was no I-making. He had grown dispassionate. Through dispassion, they are released. With release, there is the knowledge. With release, there is a knowledge. The knowledge doesn't arise with clinging. With release, there is the knowledge that they are released. We know it. Laura was just describing that process. We know it while we're going through it, and we know it when we've accomplished the task. How do we know it? Because we're released. With the knowledge that they are released from clinging to ignorant views. They know that birth is ended. What kind of birth? That there's no longer a possibility within me to give birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. They know that birth is ended. The fully integrated life, usually that the translation is that the holy life has been lived. The Buddha wasn't teaching a religion, and so there can be a misunderstanding of what holy means, but holy simply means holistic or well integrated with what the Buddha is teaching. The fully integrated life, meaning integrated with the Eightfold Path, has been lived, the path complete. They know there will be no more moments rooted in ignorance. And then the Buddha concludes this with a verse, and we'll be done. Beautiful words. Form is like a glob of foam, feeling a bubble. Perception is a mirage. Fabrications are a banana tree. Consciousness is a magician's trick. Remember when I said yesterday that we are the magicians and we continually pull this trick on ourselves through our thinking, through consciousness. Consciousness, a magician's trick. When you observe them and appropriately examine them, it is clear they are empty, void, and without substance. To anyone who sees them clearly, they are empty of ignorance. Beginning with the body, when seen with profound discernment, as taught by the Buddha, form is rejected and cast aside. When bereft of wrong views, the emptiness of form is seen clearly like a magic trick. Self-referential views are like a magic trick. Is seen clearly like a magic trick and an idiot's babbling. This is me, this is mine. No substance is found here. No matter how much we insist that there's something substantial, there's no substance found here. A well-informed Dhamma practitioner, their persistence aroused, another way of saying their right effort is aroused, should continually view the aggregates, mindful and alert. They should discard greed, aversion, and deluded thinking and make themselves their own refuge. They should take to the Dhamma as if their head was on fire in hopes of gaining Nibbana. That's the end of the sutta. What's that one thought? The teachings of an awakened human being. So it's 11:30. I don't want to. Are there any questions or comments? But we'll talk more about this after lunch. But anything that we need to get to right now. Great. Thank you for a wonderful session and staying with me so long. It didn't seem all that long, did it?
No.
It really didn't.
Every word was an important word.
Yeah. It really is remarkable how we were talking about how the Dhamma just carries you along, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Listening this is 2 hours. It's a long time to listen to anybody babble on, but I guess we're not really babbling on, are we? It's important stuff. It's meaningful stuff.
Kind of a discussion too. So,
Well, the discussion was what we said. Now, I'm not given to hyperbole. Every one of your comments was as important as the Buddha's words and my words. Look at the scenario. If all you did was listen to me, period, and we're done, you might have gotten something out of it, but it certainly wouldn't have been to the depth of understanding that we developed here. It really is remarkable.
Boring fast.
Yeah.
Just that.
And it was anything but boring, wasn't it? Because of all of our understanding. This is how the Dhamma works.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
thank you, John.
Remarkable.